Welcome, dear viewers, to Turkish series Stars, where we drift past headlines and sit with the feelings they skim over. If you enjoy these journeys, remember to subscribe, like, and join our growing circle. Tonight, allow me to guide you into the quiet glow of Paris, a city that wears secrets like perfume, where whispers linger on the sane and truth sometimes prefers to speak in glances rather than declarations. It's there, amid a hush only old cities know, that Barış Arduç and Elçin Sengu were seen moving side by side, two people who seemed to find a tempo they once knew by heart. Paris has a habit of softening edges. On certain streets, the evening light folds over the day just so, and the world's rush yields to something gentler. It was in that setting that witnesses noticed Barış and Elçin, not as stars arranging themselves for cameras, but as two souls walking as though their steps had learned to listen again. This didn't carry the clumsiness of coincidence. Their pace matched, their conversations drifted into natural pauses, and their smiles didn't perform for attention. They appeared as people who had chosen the moment intentionally, like a meeting planned for sincerity, not spectacle. When the first set of images reached the internet, the reaction sounded less like a gasp and more like a collective exhale, as if an unspoken expectation had finally taken shape. A friend close to them, someone who avoids performative commentary and prefers to watch quietly, explained that the choice of Paris wasn't for glossy headlines. It was for privacy, for history, for a place that belongs to them in a way no one else can catalogue. Think of it as a private page inside a public book. In that space, time slows enough for the past to sit down with the present and talk without interruption. From that same circle came a line from Barış, a sentence tender in its restraint, "Elçin, we need a conversation that belongs to us." No embellishment, no fireworks, only the courage of candor and the dignity of not dressing honesty in glitter. This wasn't a call for nostalgia. It was an invitation to clarity. They began in a small cafe by the river, the kind of place that lets windows blur like a watercolor when the evening cools. At first, no one took notice, two patrons by a fogged-up window, two cups cooling between palms. But time has a way of revealing what matters. They stayed longer than a casual stop would allow. Laughter drifted low, silences stretched in the comfortable way they do when people trust the space between words, and neither of them seemed to be arranging expressions for an invisible audience. They spoke in the old language of ease, the one they once used effortlessly on sets and in conversations that never needed translation. Then came the moment that sent the internet tilting towards speculation. Not a dramatic kiss. Not a staged embrace. Just a hand finding another with the sort of instinct that isn't rehearsed. Elçin reached for Barış, and he met her gesture without hesitation, without scanning the room, without calculating angles. It looked like something remembered rather than invented. A tourist, filming the riverside for memories, caught a sliver of that quiet courage. Over the hum of the street, Barış's voice surfaced, "Let them talk. If you're with me, the noise fades." The words, barely caught, soon appeared everywhere. Quoted, captioned, debated. They avoided official statements, choosing instead to let images and subtleties carry whatever message was meant to be heard. Elçin posted a Paris sunset washed in soft gold, writing, "Sometimes the heart remembers the road home." Hours later, Barış shared a black and white of the Eiffel Tower, adding, "Life does offer another beginning, if we have the nerve to start." It didn't read like PR. It felt like lines exchanged across a distance measured in years rather than meters, words that found each other in a city that has seen every possible reunion and still makes room for new ones. The pair moved through the Louvre unhurried, like people careful with something fragile. There's a particular way one stands before certain paintings, with breath drawn shallow and eyes softened, witnesses described that posture. On another night, in a theater where velvet seats absorb both applause and confession, she rested her head on his shoulder during the final act. It wasn't a display. It was what happens when closeness stops asking permission to exist. Later, at dinner in the Marais, a waiter noticed how they held hands across the table without breaking contact, like 2 points in a line that had decided to meet and then remain. Days passed. Elçin left a tiny flower shop with peonies nestled in tissue. An unremarkable purchase to most, unless you know that peonies have long been a quiet indulgence of his. When a passerby asked whether she felt happy, she chose words that didn't reach for drama. "I feel calm," she said softly. "I think that's a good start." Calm isn't attention-seeking. Calm is deliberate. And calm, once chosen, can be hard to argue with. Online, the detective work began. People noticed they had followed each other again. They saw that Barış liked one of her older photos, the kind with a caption that wasn't romantic and yet, in hindsight, felt prophetic. Both posted images containing small star shapes, a detail so tiny it could have meant anything, or everything. Fans built timelines, not out of headlines but out of crumbs, and somehow those crumbs led in one direction. It felt like Morse code for the tender-hearted. A journalist reported spotting them in a bookstore by the water, not hovering over bestsellers but lingering in the quiet aisle where slim poetry volumes wait to be rediscovered. Barış read a line under his breath, then turned to her. "If we try," he said, "let's start at page 1. Not the middle, not the broken parts. Clean." The reporter said. Elçin's look shifted, first a flicker of surprise, then a softness that carried the weight of a decision yet to be named out loud. Moments like that don't explode. They land. They unfurl. They stay. Of course, not everyone applauded. Some observers reminded the crowd that reconciliation isn't a souvenir you pick up abroad. Love asks for more than scenery and candlelight. It needs daily truth, it requires humility, and it grows in the unglamorous places where compromises are made and kept. Yet even as commentators dissected schedules and commitments, others sensed that something heavy had eased. Fans wrote about chances earned through weathering loss without resentment. They honored the courage it takes to return, not because the past insists, but because the present feels ready to hold what the past could not. Rumors continued to collect like evening mist. There were whispers that they extended their stay, that the city asked for one more day and they said yes. Another rumor described a photo shoot set against Paris's familiar spine, a bridge, a terrace, a narrow street. Images designed not as announcements but as a quiet album of renewal. Whether those whispers turn into facts is a story for another time. What matters for now is the shift. You can feel it the way you feel weather changing before the rain arrives. What comes after the flight home? Will they stride into a premiere together, the press line suddenly less daunting in shared company? Will they sit for a conversation that gives words to what has been unfolding in gestures, or will they let eye contact and unspoken sentences keep doing the heavy lifting? Perhaps they will keep letting photographs say what statements can't. Perhaps captions will continue carrying the messages that press releases never quite capture. Paris did not grant them spectacle. It gave them a mirror polished by patience. In that reflection, they saw versions of themselves that don't compete for attention, a man who speaks low and steady, a woman who meets honesty with grace, two artists whose on-screen chemistry once belonged to the world and whose off-screen choices have always belonged to them. Maybe this trip planted a seed. Maybe it offered a lesson that will outlast the headlines. Maybe it did both, turning an echo into a note clear enough to follow. Let's not overlook the way the small things told the bigger truth. The shared umbrella during a sudden drizzle, one of them stepping closer without making a scene of it. The way they navigated a crowded corner, each naturally finding room for the other. The careful habit of setting a phone face down to keep the moment undisturbed. Even the laughter that found them when a gust of wind threatened to steal a napkin. Her amused scold, his half-shrug, and the mutual smile that settled in like an old friend. People recognize rehearsed chemistry, they also recognize ease. What we saw in those days looked like ease. Before long, a fragment of audio from that cafe visit surfaced. It was only a handful of seconds, just enough to hint at the conversation's spine. "We can choose simple," Elçin said, level and sincere. "We can," he answered. But simple doesn't mean lazy. There it was. The agreement and the challenge, side by side. If their work has taught them anything, it's that simplicity is made, not found. It takes discipline to put away noise. It takes a kind of bravery to let peace speak for you. Later, as twilight collected on the rooftops, they crossed a footbridge whose railings have held more confessions than any interview ever will. They paused halfway. There are moments when a city seems to step back and let you breathe. He looked across the water and said, "I don't want a perfect story. I want a true one." She nodded, then squeezed his hand lightly and replied, "True is enough." That hand squeeze echoed through the night like a chord struck softly and allowed to ring. The next day, they kept close to the quieter streets where the stones themselves appear to remember. In a tiny courtyard, a stray cat wound around their ankles and demanded acknowledgement. They obliged, laughing with that particular fondness people reserve for sudden, harmless interruptions. When fans timidly approached, they obliged again, gracious, unhurried, respectful of the boundary between curiosity and intrusion. No grand declarations, only small gestures building a larger meaning. The closest things often speak in whispers. As their trip wound down, a final post appeared. Not a selfie, not a teaser. Just a photo of 2 cups on a windowsill, steam fading into cool light. "Some conversations are a place," the caption read. It didn't need signatures to be understood. Moments later, another image answered, a street lamp glowing against the first hint of night, accompanied by, "When we walk, the road explains itself." No tags, no names, and yet everyone knew. So we circle back to the questions that hum beneath this story. When they return, will they stand together on a red carpet, side by side as if no time had passed? Will they offer one interview where the sentences land like closures and openings folded together, or will they keep letting their choices speak for themselves? There is power in allowing days to reveal what words try to rush. There is tenderness in building a life that doesn't require proof beyond the way someone's presence settles the room. For now, we're left with a city that held them gently, a river that carried their reflection without comment, and the sense that 2 people chose to meet where noise could not follow. Maybe this is a beginning made of calm rather than fireworks. Maybe it's a quiet agreement to hold what matters with both hands. Maybe it's both, a soft echo gathering itself into a voice strong enough to carry. Before we close today's story here on Turkish series Stars, we want to hear what you feel pulsing beneath these moments. Do you believe Barış and Elçin are ready to build something from the ground up, patient enough to lay each brick carefully? Are second chances at their strongest when they're unhurried, when they ask for consistency more than spectacle? Share your thoughts in the comments, your voice shapes this space. If you felt the pull of this deep dive, like, subscribe, and tap join for extra support and stories you won't see anywhere else. Stay near, because in the world of quiet gestures, the softest moments are often the ones that end up telling the loudest truths.